Yeah, I mean, you're going to get the problem is, unfortunately, and this is what people always run up against, is that at the end of the day, there are only two sides, right? There's the thing that can happen, and then there's the other thing that can happen. You can inject as much nuance you want into analysis, but usually in terms of your ability to affect an outcome, especially when it comes to stuff like international conflict over which an individual has a vanishingly small effect, you know, you get one side or the other. And right now the two sides are, do you provide aid for Ukraine or not? You know? I don't think everyone who's opposed to providing aid to Ukraine is some kind of Putin simp. I think a lot of them are. I think the biggest ones aren't the tanky types or whatever. I think they're the American fascists, right? Like the MTG types or whatever, who will say like not a dollar more for Ukraine until we do this, that, the other. In reality, of course, as fascists, they want to support fascists abroad. Trump got along with Putin. You know, he talks up China in like an authoritarian sense, like murdering drug dealers, like with barely any trial. The fashion in which he engages with these people indicates, which I think has always been the case, like, you know, fascists get along, right? You know, Italy, Germany, Japan. There should be ideological contradictions here, but there just aren't. They're just bad people. But within the purview of like good people, right? Like, well, we shouldn't provide aid to Ukraine. I don't know. I kind of like providing aid to Ukraine. I kind of like the fascists losing. I like them dying. You know, I wish they wouldn't. I wish they wouldn't invade. But in the context of an already existing fascist invasion, I think the idea, like, I hope the fascists lose and die, is a fairly straightforward and historically leftist talking point. I don't know why it's so unpopular now. And I think a lot of lefties also kind of defend Russia and a lot of other countries that don't like the US as the remnants of the Cold War, you know, like the displaced side, right? Like, well, maybe they lost the Cold War, but we still have to critically support anti-imperialist hegemons that form other geopolitical blocks, which I don't necessarily support. I think multipolarity is actually quite destructive. You know, unfortunately for us. But yeah, it's unfortunate. I just think the practical concern is like, to what extent is this like exacerbating nuclear tensions, right? I mean, I think that's like the
Right.
most sensible concern. I think this comes across as rather ruthless on my part, but I genuinely believe it. Russia's functionally a rogue state right now. They don't get along with China. The only countries that will go to bat to defend them are like North Korea and Syria. You know, like they don't represent a broad coalition of geopolitical interests. They're an autocracy. They're deliberately violent. They constantly threaten to begin nuclear war. I mean, they threaten nuclear war with us all the time. They have to be broken, essentially. Putin's regime, you know, I don't care about America conquering them or any bullshit like that. I just care about them not being the way they are. Like that's what I care about. And I'm hoping that like meeting really strong resistance in Ukraine, losing to Ukraine, in the midst of this economic crisis and draft, like this is the stuff that gets people like Putin hung upside down for. And I'm really, really hoping something like that happens. And if that does happen, like I would be the first to advocate for like really aggressive reparations to Russia. Like, hey, we sanctioned you for ages. Also, really sorry about the shock doctrine. Here you go. We will not be cunts this time. You know, we will. Here you go. Like, have the wealth of the West. Like, our pockets are open to you, gentlemen. Whether or not that actually happens, you know, it's not likely. But first things first. You know what I mean, right? Like they're dangerous. The Putin administration, and I think something needs to incite internal revolt. And it certainly wouldn't be them winning in Ukraine. That would only make him look better. That would, I think, prolong the danger. It's almost impossible to engage in any of these negotiations because Russia never engages in them in good faith, right? Like both of the Minsk agreements after Euromaidan, they put forward like, oh yeah, let's have this ceasefire, and then immediately broke it, or never even attempted to not break it. Really, they've historically used negotiations and ceasefires as a way of sort of how do you say it? Like trying to lure the opposition into a false sense of security or posture internationally as the peacemaker, you know, like, oh, look at me, I'm suing for peace, and the peace they're suing for is one in which they get to keep the territory that they're currently losing. um and yeah, I don't know, it's very frustrating, I guess. I don't think peace on its own is a virtue, right? It's almost like the liberal value. What do they say? a negative peace as opposed to a positive justice. That's the MLK quote. Well, obviously, the positive justice here is the, the sovereignty of Ukraine's borders, and if that involves a bit more fighting, I mean, fuck, we decided it was worth it with Hitler, so I don't know. People are worried about the nukes, I guess, but I feel like the best bet to make the world more safe, nuke-wise, is the ousting of Putin's regime and have some other, I don't know, some other oligarchical interest. God help them if they try an actual liberal democracy, just something that isn't Putin, something less that, and I just worry will only embolden them if we basically like let them get a W out of this, It seems like for the most part, like pretty good use has been made of what we give them. Like we haven't heard of any like third factions cropping up anywhere. Like there haven't been any militia groups that have like claimed an oblast or a village or something in the name of some other cause. It's all been pretty consolidated under the Ukrainian security forces, which is honestly more than I expected. So I'm happy with that. And they're making good use of what they have. Even if the Azov battalion gets their guns, I mean, they go over to Mariupol and get fucking killed by the Chechens. So, in that case, it's Nazi on Nazi violence. So I'm coming out on top no matter who actually wins in Mariupol. Not the civilians though. A lot of people died there. It's just, I don't know. It's just yeah. I guess the left is just missing an opportunity to delight in a military victory over an unambiguous fascist bad guy. And we're meandering here in a way that makes us look bad politically, too. Liberals have correctly sided with Ukraine. I don't think it makes us look that good from the left when they look over to us and we're making the same claims like Marjorie Taylor Greene does. Like we're like rubbing our hands and going, well, maybe that money should go somewhere else. Maybe, Putin should keep the territory or whatever. It makes us look pretty weird. I think in many ways Russians are equal victims to what's happening right now. All the soldiers that are being conscripted, Russian men, even students, which is wild, being ripped from their homes to be like, given some rusty gear and being thrown against like extremely high morale Ukrainians wielding top of the line US military equipment, Like Russians are over there like hauling the donkey's worth of gear to cross a river like that's up to their waist, and meanwhile there are Ukrainians that are like speed translating the instruction manuals on these HIMARS and like precision targeting gnats from 400 miles away. I feel bad for them too. Yeah, I guess just the more suffering this produces faster, I think, the more likely things are to break quickly. It's like a ripping the Band-Aid off thing, right? Like the invasion of Iraq killed far fewer people than the long-term occupation of Iraq. Because, things drag out, like, the systemic failures mount. And I'm hoping, like, whatever is going to oust Putin, like, it has to be, like, the utter demoralization of the Russian people, which hopefully is a precursor to a better world, like a better Russia, one without Putin. But, that's my hope. You have all these OPSEC, like, liberal pieces of shit who, when Russians were fleeing from Russia to avoid the draft, they were like, no, stay in your country, fight against Putin. Which, A, is the same logic that fascists used against Syrian refugees, and B, it's a reaffirmation of the logic that people like Putin use to stay in power. Because to the Russian citizen, they may think Putin is bad, but if they believe the rest of the world hates them, which is what the Kremlin has always been telling them, that they're like the last onslaught against American imperialism and the rest of the world would disintegrate them if they could, they will choose Putin over annihilation. The only sensible way forward is to remind the Russian people that as unfortunate as their conscription is, while we will continue to fight against their invasion, they are victims too, and if Putin was removed, they are as worthy of restitution as any other victim of this conflict or of the Kremlin. But these fucking idiots, of course, because at the end of the day, like the liberals in our countries only support Ukraine because it's an American hegemony thing, right? Like the fucking, these OPSEC dipshits with the Ukrainian flags in their bios support Ukraine because for the same reason they would have supported Iraq, right? They were morally lucky this time. They lucked into the correct answer this time. But the situation could have been entirely different, and they would have just supported blindly whoever the Americans picked. And I hate them for it, and they worsen the conflict, and they're going to make Russian people look and see like, oh, wow, well, this war may suck, but the rest of the world fucking hates me. So I guess this is just what we're stuck with.